to note that. Today, I'd like to especially thank all the candidates who are here to join us, our panelists asking questions, and our Democrats Abroad Maryland State team for organizing today's candidate event. And it's really the work of our volunteers that makes Democrats Abroad's work possible. In 2020, we made miracles happen under the most difficult circumstances. During a pandemic, postal services shut down, and we increased the civilian vote from abroad by 50%. The number of Americans voting from abroad exceeded President Biden's margin of victory in both Georgia and in Arizona. And we're committed to having those same extraordinary results again this year. There's many opportunities to do an exciting and fulfilling work, and I'm so glad we're making a start today in Maryland with this first candidates panel. We do have a list of things that you can do to help Democrats abroad. We have tiny actions that can make a big difference. The first thing everybody should do is make sure that you request an absentee ballot and that you vote whenever there's an election in your district. Every vote and every state counts. That's what we stand for at Democrats Abroad. Many issues that you care about are on the ballot this year, and wherever you are, you can make a difference. Another really important thing you can do is you can donate to support the work of Democrats Abroad to get out the overseas vote. We're really the only organization organizing to get out the Democratic vote from abroad and supporting voters, from educating them about how to vote, to requesting their ballot, to making sure all their answers requests that they actually get a ballot and know how to return it, make sure it is returned, received, counted, and if necessary, cured. It's extraordinary work that we do. And please consider making a donation today to support this work. There'll be a link in the chat for you to donate today. So thank you for joining us, and I'll now hand back to Beth to talk about the importance of voting from abroad in Maryland. Take it away, Beth.
Thank you, Martha. One second. So, yes. Sorry, I seem to have lost. Yeah. Welcome and thank you for joining wherever you may be signing on from, as well as everyone who may be listening in afterwards. My name is Beth Landry. My pronouns are they, them. And I vote in Frederick City, Maryland from Sweden. I serve as the Democrats Abroad Maryland State Team Lead. As Martha noted, the news today of the Key Bridge collapse was devastating for myself and others that I know to hear. My thoughts are with the families of those injured and missing, and the impact that this will have for my friends, family, and the city and state that I love. With that said, we have 50 days until Maryland's primary election on May 14th. Maryland has a lot at stake in 2024, especially in races up and down the ballot. This year, we have an open race for the U.S. Senate. This is an incredibly important race for us as Democrats to ensure we keep control of the Senate. We also have open races for Congressional Districts 2, 3, and 6. These districts encompass all or part of 9 Maryland counties, plus a part of Baltimore City. Furthermore, reproductive rights are on our ballot this year, and with the referendum to enshrine the right to choose in our state's constitution. As Democrats abroad, we must do everything we can to get out the vote. We hope that you will learn a great deal from attending today or listening in afterwards about these phenomenal candidates running in Maryland's 2024 primary elections. But first, I will hand it over to Jennifer, who's going to talk a little bit about requesting your ballots for 2024.
Thanks, Beth. My name is Jennifer von Esdorf, and I serve as the Democrats Abroad State Teams Coordinator, and I coordinate all 15 of our state teams. Did you know that in 2020, over 27,000 Marylanders submitted a ballot request to vote from abroad? Dates and deadline for Maryland voters abroad are especially important since you do have to return your ballots by postal mail. For Maryland's 2024 primaries on May 14th, Maryland voters must be registered to vote by April 23rd. Ballot request deadlines do vary depending on the method you submit your ballot request by, as well as the method you choose to receive your ballot. We do recommend, though, that you ask to have your ballot sent to you by email or online, which Maryland makes it very easy to do, and this will avoid postal delays. So head to votefromabroad.org today. That's votefromabroad.org. and that will walk you through the process to request your Maryland ballots for the rest of 2024. And the great thing about voting in the primary is that you will have a practice run to make sure that you're all set to go for November. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I will now hand it back over to Beth to share an overview of today's candidate event.
Thank you, Jennifer. So to preface today's event, the Maryland team sent invitations to all primary candidates running for the races of U.S. Senate, U.S. House District 2, and U.S. House District 6. Our candidate panel participants replied by the deadline to attend in either of our panel days available times, so today or tomorrow. Today, we have 5 candidate speakers running for 2 offices. County Executive Angela Alsobrooks is running for U.S. Senate, and State Delegate Lesley Lopez, Ashwani Jain, Councilmember at Large Laurie-Anne Sayles, and April McClain Delaney are running for U.S. House District 6. We will introduce each candidate, and then each will share their vision to serve if elected. After their speeches, each candidate will answer questions taken in advance. Our panelists today include Maryland constituents and Democrats Abroad member leaders from the Global Women's Caucus, as well as the Medicare Portability and Reparations Task Forces. We will now go ahead and start our candidate panel and introduce the first of today's candidate speakers. And I am not watching the chat to know. Our first candidate speaker is Delegate Lesley Lopez. And is Candidate Lopez on? Okay. All right. Thank you for the thumbs up. So Delegate Lesley Lopez is a 2-term delegate in the Maryland General Assembly, where she has been the president of the Women's Legislative Caucus and Deputy Majority Whip. She was born in Paget, Bermuda, as the daughter of an active duty single mother in the U.S. Navy. After graduating from the University of California, San Diego in 2005, Lopez began a career in journalism by working for the show America's Most Wanted in Bethesda, Maryland. Lopez went on to work as a legislative staffer on Capitol Hill for Representative Henry Cuellar of Texas 28th District in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Since 2012, she has been an adjunct faculty member at George Washington University, where she obtained her MPS in management. She lives in Clarksburg with her husband and 2 young boys. And without further ado, I will hand it over to candidate Lesley Lopez.
Thank you, Beth, for that lovely introduction. And good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you all might be. For the sake of formality, my name is Lesley Lopez. I am a state delegate here in Maryland, representing a big portion of this district for the past 6 years. I'm a wife and a mom of 2 little pre-K boys, and I'm an educator when I'm not making laws. I've been an adjunct faculty member for 12 years at George Washington University, and I'm a union member. And, for the past 6 years, I've been really pleased to and honored to be representing a significant portion of this congressional district in Annapolis. The most important question that we ask of people running for office is why? Like, why are you running for this seat? Why now? Why you? For me, there's 100 different experiences I've had in my life that have reinforced this notion, but ultimately it comes down to the fact that if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. And I felt that being raised by a single mother in a low-income household. I felt that, putting myself through school, through all of my degrees. I worked as a domestic worker for several years to put myself through grad school as well. And when I was scrubbing pots and pans and toilets, I was dreaming of a better life for myself and for people like me. And now that I'm a lawmaker, I don't have to dream anymore. I get to do every day. And so since I've been in office, I've prioritized bills that help working families, things like consumer advocacy protection. I got Consumer Advocate of the Year last year for work on student loan debts. and protecting people for their, making sure that they kept their last $500 in their bank account when they were going through bankruptcy. I'm working on a lot of medical debt reduction bills this session. And as was mentioned in my intro, I was president of the Women's Caucus last year, and we worked on a whole range of things like ending co-payments for mammograms, changing the formula for scholarships for childcare so more people can get affordable and accessible childcare. But probably most notably with the Women's Caucus, we took a position on choice for the first time in 40 years. And we pushed, at that point, Governor Hogan, and we'll keep pushing Governor Hogan, who is, of course, running for Senate now, to actively support bodily autonomy. And this November, we'll have a ballot initiative that reflects the success of that work. The other thing I'm known for most in Annapolis is I am the author of the ban on ghost guns. Ghost guns, as you might know, are the kits that you buy online that are unserialized. There's no background check, and you put them together, and they're effectively an assault rifle or a Glock style handgun. And I worked with law enforcement, with gun safety advocates, and most notably a Second Amendment NRA-backed state senator named Michael Huff. If you know him, I'm sorry. He's a very tough customer. If you ever walked into his office in Annapolis, you'd have to walk over a rug that said NRA on it. Like that's the type of guy I had to deal with on this one. But it became, once this bill passed, it became really the blueprint for how to get bipartisan gun bills passed in state legislatures. And I got invited to the White House as one of 3 lawmakers who had this type of success. And so I know I'm up to the challenge of representing this district, which is very complicated geographically. It's complicated in the sense that there's a whole bunch of local and county officials who are not of the Democratic Party that you have to form partnerships with. And I'm proud to say that I'm the only person in this race who has a proven track record of doing that, of talking to some of the toughest critics and softening them and getting to develop partnerships with them. And so I think that's what I bring to the table, a proven track record of lawmaking success and lived experiences that help me prioritize what needs to get done.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we've got a few questions for you, and I will start off. This one is one about taxation, because that's certainly one of our biggest struggles as overseas voters. It's, as I said, a struggle for Americans who are overseas to file their taxes due to the complexity of filing from abroad. Would you consider co-sponsoring H.R. 5432, the Americans Abroad Simplified Filing Act, and encouraging your congressional colleagues to do the same? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just taking a step back, I think the way taxes are administrated in this country are very problematic. One, in the sense that we do need a more progressive tax structure. We also need to fully fund the IRS. It's something that's constantly a Republican talking point, and a tactic is to defund the IRS. And what we've seen is that the wealthiest people in our country, the people who are making over $400,000 a year annually and individually, are simply not paying their taxes the way that they should. Like, just pay what you owe. That's a good first step. I've seen some reports that say there's $160 billion of unpaid taxes by the wealthiest people among us. And so, without getting into all the changes of what a progressive tax structure would look like, I think at the very baseline, fund the IRS, make sure it's administratively sound, and make sure that people are paying what they owe.
Thank you so much. I'll hand over to Beth.
Thank you for that. So the second question that we have is a member submission about climate. Americans will not meet climate goals on their own. They need a fair, government-enforced plan of action that includes more than investing in alternate energy sources and technologies. Would you consider reducing your constituents' carbon footprints by setting limits on things like energy use, travel, plastic production, meat production, or clothing imports? What will you propose to directly reduce America's carbon footprint?
Sure. So, and at the state legislative level, we're already working on certain plastic bottle bills that you might be familiar with. I'd have to check to see what the current status is, but from my perspective, changes like that need to be made at the industry level. I think when you put the onus on consumers to do things, like people's lives are already so complicated. We're already trying to make it to work, be good parents, drink 64 ounces of water a day, like all of the things that you're supposed to do to be a healthy human being. So I like to make changes when it comes to, or I like to think about changes that need to be made about climate change at the top level, making sure that those are industry changes. And so one of the things that we're doing in the state government is looking at plastic bottle production. Another example of that is grocery store bags. States and other places, municipalities or counties are moving into the direction of eliminating plastic bags being sold in grocery stores or being used in grocery stores. And so I think, climate change is our existential threat of this generation, and we need to be creative about all the different ways that we could address it. I think in a large scale way, making a transition to clean energy should be a top priority. Of course, we're all in this together and we need international partners like India and China and other countries that are, significant polluters to join in with us. And we need to have political leadership that can actually, move things in the right direction. And we need to be taken seriously and credibly by our international partners in order to do that.
Thank you. I'll hand it over to Dee for the next question.
Hello, thank you for joining us today.
Hi.
Americans abroad face a number of unique challenges, including barriers to voting, complex and costly tax filing, the inability to access financial institutions and consular services, as well as not being recognized and understood as a sizable constituency by our congressional representatives. Would you consider co-sponsoring H.R. 2729, the Commission on Americans Living Abroad Act, which would enable studying how federal laws and policies affect U.S. citizens living in foreign countries?
Absolutely. And I feel like as we move into a more connected world via Zoom and things like that, as technology allows us connect more with Americans abroad, it seems like there's going to be people living in different places. This is a global economy, and we need to understand that Americans are living in all different corners of the globe. And so whatever we can do to make life easier for our American citizens, I think is a great first step. Commissions, we do commissions quite a bit at our state government level to do this exact type of work, to understand at just like a baseline level what needs to be done. And I think that's an excellent approach and philosophy.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, we'll hand over to Art Shankler now from our Art. Tell us your task force again.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. I'm with our Medicare Portability Task Force. So my question is going to be about Medicare portability. Just to let you know, Delegate Lopez, many U.S. citizens abroad have earned Medicare benefits by working in the U.S. and paying into the system for years, people like me. Unfortunately, Medicare benefits are not accessible outside of the U.S., and many overseas Americans must either pay for private insurance or travel back to the U.S. to use their Medicare, and where it's likely much more costly than that healthcare benefits in their host country, healthcare costs in their host country. Your campaign literature notes you support strengthening the efficiency and effectiveness of our healthcare system. Where would you stand on Medicare portability, which would provide for Medicare to qualified Americans overseas, and pilot programs such as that proposed by Congressman Espaillat of New York, who's my congressman, in H.R. 5299 that seek to remedy this health insurance issue for U.S. citizens abroad and potentially save money for the Medicare system and U.S. taxpayers. Sorry, that was quite a mouthful there. But
yeah, so the short answer is I 100% support Congressman Espaillat's legislation. I serve on health and government operations, and so I understand the complexity, the redundancy, the just ridiculousness in our healthcare system. And granted, I think we've made huge inroads with the Affordable Care Act, but I would advocate towards a public option, if not a single payer program for folks here in the United States. We have a system that only really benefits healthcare or insurance carriers and big pharma, and it certainly is not patient focused. And I think probably as Americans who live abroad, you are probably even more acutely and painfully aware about how lacking the American healthcare system is, because you're exposed to other countries that prioritize patients first. And so in this case, I would really look to make your viewpoint central about what exactly you need, because you're on the front lines. You have a very clear perspective of what needs to happen. And so happy to support the congressman's legislation and other supplemental things that might arrive after that.
Thank you very much for that. I would hand it back over to Jennifer because we're running a little bit early. We might have time for another question. So perhaps if there's any questions, we could take one really quick from people who are here on the Zoom. Did anyone have a question that they wanted to?
I have one.
And
I have. Yeah.
I'm sorry, who's speaking?
Paul.
I
am.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes,
so
go
basically,
ahead.
So like, do you support a ceasefire in Gaza, given the fact that like Hamas has literally said that they will conduct other attacks if they have control of the Strip, and if so, what is your plan to prevent Hamas from launching another attack?
Gotcha. Hello? Sure. So in terms of Israel and Palestine, I think we need to take this as an opportunity to try to figure out how to create a more lasting peace. I don't know, and to me, a lasting peace is a two-state solution. I don't know how you can get to that point where you can even have negotiations if the hostages are not returned and if Hamas is still in a position of power. And so I think, to me, those are like the two critical first steps. Israel is, a democratically elected government. They have a right to defend themselves. And certainly what we've seen is a very strong military response. And I think the United States used to use its leadership, its moral leadership, everything we can do to move things into a post conflict situation where we can do the nation building and the peace building part. That's really what our strength is. And so I hope that there is a ceasefire soon, but I think it has to be once Hamas is no longer in a position of power. I just don't see any sustained or prolonged peace if a terrorist organization is in a position of leadership. The other thing we have to think about is that Hamas is funded largely by Iran, right? And so there's a bigger, geopolitical dynamic at stake. Foreign policy in this particular region is not my area of expertise. I know about U.S.-China trade policy and immigration policy. And so I would really look to experts who have a very acute understanding of the nuance and the day-to-day to guide my policy.
Okay, cool. Good answer.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I don't know if you have any final words for our participants. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, I just want to say that I am so thankful that you are active and engaged in the political process and that you're bringing your perspective to, American politics. You have just a different perspective on what we could be doing. I just am greatly appreciative to have your time, and hopefully I can earn your votes as well for those respective Congressional 6 folks.
Well, thank you for joining us today on behalf of the Maryland team, candidate Lopez. I'm glad to have you. Our participants are glad to have you, and we will go ahead and transition to, I believe our next person is here with us, which is candidate April McClain Delaney. Okay, and I'll go ahead and share the introduction for candidate McClain Delaney, who is running for Congressional District 6 in Maryland. So April McClain Delaney is a seasoned professional with diverse experiences in both public and private sectors, bringing a blend of expertise to Congress. With a background in media and tech spanning over 30 years, she understands the needs of small businesses and the challenges faced by families, having raised 4 daughters herself. Her leadership roles at Common Sense Media and in the Biden administration demonstrate her commitment to issues such as online safety, digital equity, and economic development. Raised in a rural community, April learned the values of hard work, education, and community engagement early on. Her journey from a small town upbringing to attending Northwestern University and Georgetown Law Center shaped her dedication to giving back and advocating for others. Throughout her career, April has championed causes close to her heart, including children's digital literacy and access to broadband. Her work with Common Sense Media and her involvement in various charitable organizations reflect her passion for making a difference in people's lives. As a member of the Biden administration, April played a key role in expanding broadband access, promoting internet governance, and advancing public safety communications. She believes in leveraging technology for economic development and addressing key issues facing her district, including climate change, education, and rebuilding trust in democracy. April's approach to governance emphasizes common sense, common ground solutions, and building coalitions to tackle challenges facing her constituents. She envisions a future where technology enhances community resilience and economic prosperity while prioritizing trust and collaboration in governance. And without further ado, I will hand it over to candidate McClain Delaney, running for House District 6.
Thanks, Beth, and to Martha and Jennifer for pulling this together. And thanks to the Democrats abroad. I couldn't believe there were 200,000 of them overseas, and the 27,000 that requested their ballot. And I just first have to say, yeah, definitely register to vote. Mail-in ballots go out in early April. I always say vote April and April. And be an ambassador for all those outside of Maryland or friends of yours overseas to make sure that we engage and vote because it's so important. And I also have to say, it was a tragedy this morning seeing the Key Bridge in Baltimore go down, and all of our thoughts are out to them as well. So I'm really excited to talk to you all because a third of my life has been in international. While I'm in Cumberland and Hagerstown and Frederick, and I'm all over the 6th District because I well know it, it's not often that I get to speak about my international expertise and all that I've done over the years. And so it's a really exciting thing to be here. A couple of things. I've spent a lot of time looking at a lot of the international issues, from spending my junior year abroad in Italy to working in an international satellite company based in Rockville. I oversaw about 25 countries overseas in the late 90s and early 2000s in telecom. But most recently, I served in the Biden administration as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Communications, working under rock star Gina Raimondo. And I did a lot of work with respect to our telecom, our cybersecurity, looking at how democracy is being received abroad. A lot of our international work with against Huawei in terms of investment. But what I would say to you all, and a lot with, I should also say, with women and girls overseas in the Gender Council and my work with the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security. But what I really is important as that we as Democrats really, and you see it more than anything else, is the democracy. Our world is on fire, and what a shining beacon of light we are in America in terms of what we can do overseas, but how we have to ensure that our own democracy, that we have fair and transparent elections, that we fight against this hate speech and disinformation, and that we really uplift who we are as Americans and invest economically, because our economic security also is linked to our national security and how we fortify so much of that. So I just had to get that out because I think it's really important for you all as we're doing good work. And part of my work, a lot of my work, I hope, in addition to well representing the residents of the 5 counties, which is a microcosm of America. I often say it's a purple district, but there's not a lot of purple people. It's very blue in Montgomery County, very red in Allegheny, Garrett, and Washington. And Frederick, skews Democrat, but is, really in between red, blue, rural, urban. And this microcosm of America, I travel a lot, but it's important that we look at our global landscape. I do have a common sense, common ground platform because we don't get anything done in Congress anymore. And I really think it's important that even though we have to fight against MAGA extremism, we also lift up and look for common sense solutions that we can drive. Some of my biggest issues that I am looking at in terms of this district is driving a pragmatic, progressive approach. Obviously, I'm the mother of 4 daughters I'm a Gen X mom, and so I have 4 daughters from 31 to 16. So reproductive freedoms is crazy that it is that they have less freedoms than I did, but also even at the Supreme Court today in terms of the abortion bill. I'm very focused on looking at a comprehensive immigration reform. I'm really focused on driving investment from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act into Western Maryland, and also how we do green energy, how we take our chips. I've worked a whole lifetime on rural broadband and how we give connectivity to Frederick Mountain and Western Maryland in terms of bringing back a lot of jobs, good paying jobs, upskilling, digital upskilling, and then really looking at how do we, come together on some of these more global issues in terms of lifting up on, like I said, democracy, hate speech, but pushing back on big tech and making sure that big tech has some bumpers and safeguards. And that's what I did for a bulk of my my career at a nonprofit called Common Sense Media, where I took a lot of my telecommunications and business background and really fought for kids in terms of screen time, in terms of comprehensive privacy, the EU in the digital services and digital, a lot of their, they have a lot more protections for kids than we do for a whole host of reasons. But in all of these issues, it's really coming down to solutions which make sense and really messaging that in a way in which we counter the GOP. The last thing I'm going to say is your votes are so important particularly because we're not going to have Hogan at the top of the ticket and probably Parrott instead of Cox as the number 2 in District 6. And we have to meet that challenge, well-resourced. And I feel like I'm the best person for the job and that I have had 30 years of experience in a multitude of public, private, and government experiences. I have the ability to fundraise and have the resources to fight against the GOP with Hogan at the top of the ticket. And also, I believe in pragmatic solutions that are that take also, in addition to our Democrats, bring over the independents and those Republicans that will never vote for Trump. And so it's so important that we all vote in this election and that we keep this seat blue, given the redistricting of the lines. So that is my big, I'm not sure I went over, but I wanted to make sure I said all those things. And I just thank you for tuning in from across the globe, because it is so important that we all understand how important it is to engage both locally and globally. Oh, and I forgot to say, climate is a huge issue, one that I've worked, that my family and I believe is key. And I was just out in California with a good friend of mine, Tom Steyer, as he keeps talking about faster, smarter in ways that we can come together in public, private. We all have to deal with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. It's so hard to fit it all into a short amount of time. Yes. There's a lot to say. We do have a few questions, and I will start off, but thank you so much for joining us today. So the United States is the only developed country that requires its citizens living abroad to file a tax return at home. So every year we end up filing 2 tax returns in the US and of course in our home countries. This is frequently complex, costly, and burdensome, and it causes difficulties for everyday Americans to open bank accounts, access retirement funds, and make financial investments for our futures. And we are just normal, everyday people living abroad. I know there are a lot of myths about who we are. We're just regular families living abroad, trying to make a living. And could we count on you to work with us and support tax reform that provide relief to Americans living abroad? Thank you.
Yes. Having spent a lot of time overseas, and I oversaw an agency. I was the number 2 in an agency NTIA was my agency within Commerce, and we had a lot of our government employees living abroad because I was overseeing the international division, and I heard this a lot about all of the additional burdens it is overseas. So I think it is a big problem, and I do think we have to cut down on it. So I looked at this last night knowing that this was coming out, and there are a lot of different hurdles in terms of filing these tax returns, and particularly even if you don't make any money overseas and you're just living over there, you still have to. I looked up, I would definitely support this. Rep. Byron and Dina Titus of Nevada, who are both good friends of mine, introduced last year the Tax Simplification for Americans Abroad, the TSSA. It simplifies the tax filing return, expands types of income, and that is going to be excluded. And it also I guess, works to kind of simplify what is going to be allowed or excluded under Section 9. I guess that's the lawyer in me that's looking at. So I definitely think you need a simplification, and I'm happy to work on those issues. I do, having said that, do think it is really important. The U.S. has signed a lot of treaties with other nations to avoid double taxation, as you know, and it is important to have some of these things in terms of the banks and in terms of having international access to payment systems and making sure that they're required to, pay with U.S. regulations. And of course, looking at issues of, cyber money laundering and tax evasion. There are certain things in an international environment where you understand why there might be complications, either for cybersecurity or business reasons, or, plain old fraud. But with respect to everyday Americans living overseas, working in NGOs, businesses for our government, we definitely have to help them. And I actually think we should have more of a active work through. Even our State Department, I think, should be able, in some of their individual offices, to be able to be more of an advocate in some of these in terms of helping. I think our State Department has a lot of diplomatic responsibilities, but I think also economic. And I think, I always look at constituent services and how important it is for me, going in and representing, my constituents, but in those individual offices within the different countries, I think also having, an ability to, if there's questions or if Americans overseas don't understand some of the complications, that they have, an advocate over there or someone to at least explain some of these complicated rules.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm going to hand over to Ann Hess, the chair of our Global Women's Caucus, for the next question.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Well, this November, the Maryland Right to Reproductive Freedom Amendment is on Maryland's ballot. So I'd like to know, how have you advocated for reproductive freedom in public office, and what will you do to support passage of this important constitutional amendment?
Well, it's really important. First of all, I have to say I'm the mother of 4 daughters. I said that, from 31 to 16. And I always say I can't believe they will have less choice than I had. It is, and it's something that I've advocated for. I've been in multiple nonprofits, on the boards, or overseen, a lot of work, International Center for Research on Women, many different things where I've tried both, even domestically and internationally, tried to further choice. Obviously on a state, I cannot believe, given Dobbs, that choice is under assault. So I think one of the first things as a member of Congress, you are very active in making sure to codify Roe v. Wade on a national level. And it is so important that we have all of us are in the boat rowing to make sure we do that. And also issues in terms of making sure that healthcare is accessible for everyone, to make sure that a woman has a right to choose. On a state level, of course, Wes Moore is trying to codify into the state constitution, because obviously, given the uncertainty from Roe v. Wade, the churches, the states have been, left with trying to, like, in a patchwork quilt, trying to figure out how they are going to be able to deal with this, given the Supreme Court. That's why we have to do it at a national level. But yes, every state should step forward and codify it in their constitution. I must also say there's got to be a lot of pushback in terms of what's happening at the Supreme Court right now. And it was really funny because the governor of North Carolina was on this morning in terms of the abortion bill. And you can't believe it that these justices have said that this was a state's issue. And now they are trying to look at if the FDA, which has approved a drug which has been used by over 5 million women for over 2 decades safely, and is now trying to say if it is, there are health concerns to use this. And it has been a safe way for women in a very confidential way, particularly when there has been, a trauma or otherwise, to be able to have access to reproductive freedoms. So in all ways, I will fight for this. And I have done it for all of my life in philanthropic and nonprofit, working at nonprofits, and now in government. It will be a top priority for me.
All right, thank you so much. And I am going to hand back over to our Maryland team lead, Beth Landry.
Thank you very much, candidate McClain Delaney, again, for joining us and on behalf of the Maryland State team. And for all the participants, we're thankful for your time. I would go ahead and say goodbye for now and transition over.
Did I overgo? Can I just say 20 seconds about the other 2 questions?
They are kind of they are a mouthful.
I can say it really quickly.
Go for it. It's good.
So
okay,
Malika,
I would say with respect
I don't know if viewers know the questions. That's what I was going to say. Malika,
no, they did. They said.
I think it's important. Lesley said it. If you don't have a seat at the table, you are on the menu. We are on the menu, but we are what we eat. And therefore, this question is very important. Basically, I'll jump to, if I can read it quickly. In consideration of the growing demand for Maryland voters at home and abroad for state-level reparation task force and the powerful demand of Black Americans across the world for a federal commission to reckon with the damages of chattel slavery, Jim Crow, and modern-day racial disparities. And this is the key word. To what extent have you been actively involved with reparation movement, and what would you be willing to support to work towards the passage of HR 40 and S40? It sounds like it comes from the left field, Ms. Delaney, but we are what we eat, and we are definitely on the menu.
Yes, I will say quickly, I will support HR 40. It's a good idea to study this task force. It has been joined by over 100 members of the U.S. sponsoring teams. Slavery is the most immoral thing that has ever happened. And we really need to look at this. And, the African Americans are still lagging economically, socially, and healthcare. And I spent a lot of my work in the administration, working in the Biden administration with Secretary Raimondo on digital equity, on equity of all sorts, and I have spent a lifetime in nonprofit as well, working on these issues in terms of furthering equity, no matter who you are, and it is very key.
Thank you so much for insisting for that time. I appreciate it.
Yes. And also climate. I know I'm a huge supporter of climate. Invest in innovating your way out of it. It's a global issue. What happened in Kyoto? I think we've got to dive deep in terms of climate and how we look at it. And we've got to price carbon. We've got to price carbon, and we've got to look at ways that we can engage internationally, and that we all are ambassadors on this in all forums.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us. I believe our next candidate is here with us, so I'll go ahead and introduce. Hi, good morning. So Ashwani Jain, he, him, is a 34-year-old son of immigrants, running for Congressional District 6, by the way, and a small business owner, a product of Maryland Public Schools, a published author, and a cancer survivor. He has experience working in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, including the Obama-Biden White House, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the National Kidney Foundation. In 2022, he became the youngest person to run for Maryland governor in over 200 years. He is currently a candidate for Congress in Maryland's 6th District. If elected, he would serve as Maryland's first millennial and first Asian member. Mr. Jain holds dual bachelor degrees from the University of Maryland and a master's in political management from George Washington University. And the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, for your work, and for everyone for taking the time. I know people are in different time zones as well, so regardless of what time you're in, I appreciate you all for giving me this opportunity. I really would love to get into the questions. Just as Beth mentioned, my name is Ashwani Jain. I am one of the many candidates running to represent you in the Maryland Congressional 6th District. A little bit more about me and kind of why I decided to run for Congress. I'm running in my home district. Yes, not just to make history as Maryland's first millennial or first Asian to serve in the office, but because I have specific policy solutions that will open the doors of opportunity for all of our community members. Those are issues that include getting money out of politics, making public college free, canceling student debt, having Medicare for all, taking bold stances, like being the first in my race to actually call for a ceasefire in Gaza, and understanding that right now what is needed in Congress is someone who not only doesn't forget about every constituent, including those who live abroad, but who also understands how to build coalitions at the federal level and fight for federal funding for our district. And the fact that I have the most expansive federal experience of anyone in this race, which includes being appointed to 2 different offices in President Obama's White House and in 2 federal agencies, I think provides me that unique perspective and experience that is so desperately needed. The last thing I'll say is on this, I also come from a family of immigrants who worked very hard to achieve their American dream. And they taught me if we're lucky enough to open those doors of opportunity for ourselves, we must keep those doors open for everyone behind us, and we must demand better. I was lucky enough to be given another opportunity at life once I beat cancer at the age of 13, and I have dedicated every single day of my life since to empowering others to demand better. And that's why I'm running for Congress. So even during this and after this session, you can go to my website, janeforcongress.com, to hold me accountable, look at all those policies and nuance. And if you want to have a further conversation after this, please reach out, and I would love to have those conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we're going to hand over for our first question to one of our Maryland voters. Dee, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for joining us today. Americans abroad face a number of unique challenges, including barriers to voting, complex and costly tax filings, the inability to access financial institutions and consular services, as well as not being recognized and understood as a sizable constituency that has actually pushed over several elections in recent years by many of our congressional representatives. Would you consider co-sponsoring H.R. 2729, the Commissions on Americans Living Abroad Act, which would enable studying how federal policies affect U.S. citizens living in foreign countries?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Short answer, of course, yes, but I want to get into it a little more. And again, I know I'm speaking of you all who already know this, but for anyone else who's listening, Americans abroad often get treated like second-class citizens simply because they are currently not living in the United States. But I believe they are owed and due the exact same rights as anyone living domestically. So not only would I support this because it would help us figure out how federal laws would apply to citizens abroad, but I would also make sure that, when we're establishing this 10-person commission, which is what this act calls for, I want to make sure it's bipartisan. And I want to make sure that the members of this commission actually have the lived experience of living in a foreign country so they can bring that unique perspective and understanding and that nuance. I also believe that every vote should be counted. So I've been very vocal about strengthening mail-in voting, for example. As long as your ballot is postmarked by Election Day, it is not your fault if the foreign mail service does not get it to us on time. I believe all citizens should still be able to cast their vote without being penalized, which so often happens. Expanding on that even more, Americans, abroad, they pay dual taxes, right? Back to the United States and then to the country they're residing in. And I believe we might be one of the only countries that do that. but they're still receiving federal benefits like Social Security and Medicare. So on one hand, I think some of those taxes are reasonable, but I do want to look into decreasing those taxes because Americans abroad are not using all of our public utilities, like our public roads, like our public schools. So I want to look into that more. And again, this commission can help in terms of understanding those nuances. The final thing I'll say on this particular question is, a citizen abroad should still have the congressional representation, regardless of where they are physically residing. And so it's my goal to still provide that level of constituent services to those residents. And some of that looks like, making sure that passport services are being provided in an efficient way. If you need to contact the embassy, you're able to do so in an efficient manner with the right points of contact, and also obviously dealing with immigration issues. So again, it's a comprehensive issue that needs a comprehensive and nuanced approach. And hopefully I've kind of exemplified some of that in my remarks.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Art Shankler from our Medicare Portability Task Force.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Mr. Jain. By the way, we usually say that Eritrea is the only other country that taxes its citizens when they're outside their home country. So you can derive whatever you want from that. And I think you mentioned Medicare. Well, I would point out that many U.S. citizens abroad have earned Medicare benefits by working in the U.S. and paying into the system for years. But unfortunately, Medicare benefits are not accessible outside of the U.S. And many overseas Americans, like me, for example, must pay for private insurance or travel at great expense back to the U.S. to take advantage of their Medicare. And that Medicare, the cost of that Medicare is likely much more costly than that in their own host country. So would you be willing to support efforts on Medicare portability, i.e. providing Medicare to Americans overseas, and pilot programs such as that proposed by Congressman Espaillat of New York in H.R. 5299 that seek to remedy this health insurance issue for U.S. citizens abroad and potentially save money for Medicare as well as U.S. taxpayers? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Short answer, yes. More nuanced answer. This is very similar to concerns I hear from veterans domestically, as an example. If you live in a part of the United States that does not have a VA hospital, we already have programs in place. In this case, it would be community care, where those veterans are referred to a local hospital or practice that ensures that they provide similar benefits. And so it's that type of practice and mentality, I think, that we need to apply to our citizens living abroad as well. I do not like the idea that as a citizen who has paid into Medicare and some of these other services, that you are no longer able to use those benefits when you need it. So yes, I would support pilot programs like this as long as they do not decrease the quality or the cost of care to that citizen, and that citizen is still able to get those services when they actually need it.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I would also point out we have a number of veterans who find themselves in the similar situation, even more so when they're living overseas. Thanks. Thank you.
All right. So probably time for one more question. This one is something that's near and dear to all of our hearts. The Congressional Americans Abroad Caucus, led by Congresswoman Dina Titus from Nevada, helps members of Congress remain up to date and demonstrate their support for the issues of U.S. citizens abroad. Would you be willing to join this caucus to help address the unique issues of our overseas community?
Yes, of course. But beyond that, and again, caucuses really help, understanding those issues and nuances. But I think all members of Congress should understand that citizens living abroad are going to be facing unique challenges. But even though they're unique, they're no less important. Maryland and Art mentioned this as well, but Maryland and my district actually has a sizable number of citizens who live abroad, partly because of the number of military and foreign service officials. I know it's not exclusive to service members, but that is a relevant issue for so many reasons. As you all know, right, you all are facing unique healthcare challenges and issues, as we just discussed in the previous question, but you also have to figure out and learn how to comply with both U.S. laws and regulations, as well as that of your host country. You obviously are subject to double taxation, as I mentioned earlier. You may be also facing mental health challenges from residents I know who live abroad, right? They're missing their friends and family. And so kind of navigating that nuance I think is important, especially as a representative, to understand when I'm working on tangible issues. And then also when it comes to education, right? If you have children, right, you uproot your family or your children are living abroad as well, and you have to figure out how to get them the right and proper education as well. So I think all those issues, again, need to be tackled in a comprehensive way. And so, joining these types of caucuses helps with that. It helps bring and build coalitions with other members of Congress and fight, again, for federal legislation and then for that federal funding and nuance to actually get that care and get those services to where they need to go.
Excellent. Actually, we will have time for one last question, and I am going to hand over to Ann Hess, the chair of our Global Women's Caucus.
Thank you for taking my question. One last one. It's important to me. This November, the Maryland Right to Reproductive Freedom Amendment is on Maryland's ballot. So how have you advocated for reproductive freedom in public office, and what will you do to support passage of this constitutional amendment?
Yes, thank you so much for that question, and I love your posters behind you. So as my demonstration, number one, for the last 3 years, I have fought and advocated to get abortion care and gender-affirming care enshrined in our Maryland state constitution. I want to make sure at a federal level that we federally protect that access. I was also the first candidate in this particular race back in October to even have a women's rights reproductive justice platform on my website, janeforcongress.com. But it also looks at reproductive justice in a comprehensive way. I'm the only candidate in my race that has been advocating for Medicare for all. I also talk about having comprehensive sex ed in all of our public schools, which teach about everything from abstinence to contraceptives to gender identity to consent, making sure we have free menstrual products in all of our public restrooms, because if toilet paper can be free, so should menstrual products, investing in community health workers, having living donor protection acts in place, creating mandatory minimum nurse to patient ratios for hospitals, making sure we extend the solvency of Social Security. All these issues are women's issues as well. They are reproductive justice issues. They are healthcare issues and need to be tackled at the same time in a comprehensive manner.
Wow, that's great. Thank you very much for the.
All right, and now I will hand back over to Beth Landry, our Maryland team lead.
Thank you for joining us, taking the time today on behalf of the team and everyone who's listening in. Yeah, that is our final question for today. And like you said, for folks to get in touch with you afterwards if they have other questions. I wanted to take a brief second because I don't believe I see our next candidate here on the line, but somebody do. Oh, I have been proven wrong. Now they are here. So thank you again for joining us, and we will transition over to our next candidate participant.
Great. Thank you all so much.
And introduce them. Okay, and so next we are being joined by County Executive Angela Alsobrooks, who is running for U.S. Senate.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. I'll go ahead and say her introduction, and she'll be able to speak with us. A lifelong Marylander, Angela was born and raised in Prince George's County. She was taught from a young age to care for her neighbors and give back to her community, urged on by the words of her great-grandmother not to sit on the sidelines, but to go farther and do better. Angela heard an early calling to public service, and after graduating from Duke University and the University of Maryland School of Law, she worked as a law clerk in the Howard County Circuit Court and later the Baltimore City Circuit Court, before becoming the first full-time assistant state's attorney to handle domestic violence cases in Prince George's County. Angela held a variety of roles in county government before making history as the youngest and first woman to be elected Prince George's County State's Attorney. As the county's top law enforcement officer, Angela stood up for families, taking on some of Maryland's worst criminals while treating victims and the accused with dignity and respect. Under her tenure, violent crime dropped by 50%, and she established a first-of-its-kind unit to investigate and prosecute police and official misconduct. In 2018, Angela was elected Prince George's County Executive, the first woman to hold the position and the first Black woman elected to the office of County Executive in Maryland history. She has focused on creating jobs and growing economic opportunity, investing in education and breaking ground on 10 new schools, expanding access to healthcare, mental health and addiction treatment, youth outreach, and making sure people are safe. Raising her own daughter in Upper Marlboro, Angela knows Marylanders should have a senator who both fights for them and shares their concerns. Angela is running for Senate to be a voice for families like the ones she grew up with and who she's worked for throughout her life. Take it away.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much to you, Beth, and to the entire team. Thank you so much for hosting me, and to everyone on the call today. What an honor it is to have a chance to introduce myself to you and to say to each of you as well, thank you so much for your tremendous service. I know that that many of you are serving here and around the world. And I'm really grateful to have a chance to introduce myself to you. I can tell you, I've spent the last 27 years of my life in public service. I believe service is the highest calling. I can tell you also that it has just been a sheer joy to represent families for whom Marylanders, I'm a native-born Marylander, and it's been a real joy for me to represent families who I believe want exactly what we want for all of our families, to have the opportunity to live in safe and affordable places, homes, to be able to invest and to have the single best education possible for our children, to have healthcare, quality and affordable healthcare when we are sick, and to have true economic opportunity for all of our families has been really the vision that I have had over the last 27 years. And I've been really, really just privileged to have been able to do this. I can tell you that I will focus in the Senate on many of the issues that I've had the opportunity to focus on over the last 27 years. I was raised in a very working class family by a mother who was a receptionist for her the entirety of her career. My father, who worked as a newspaper delivery person and then a car salesman. And then together, the two of them really did emphasize to me that education, they believe, was the great equalizer in our country, that I should focus my time and effort not only on receiving the single best education that I could, but that I had an affirmative obligation to use that education to the betterment of others, that I didn't have the right, as my great-grandmother told me, to sit on the sidelines as I watched things happening all around me, but that I really had an obligation to my neighbors. And so that spurred me to run for office in 2010. I started, I should tell you, first of all, as the first full-time domestic violence prosecutor in 1997. And that was my on-ramp to public service. I loved it. And I have continued since that time, both in public office. I ran in 2010 and I was elected state's attorney because I believe that all of our kids deserve to live in safe places. And I felt my daughter was growing up in a place that seemed less safe than the one I had grown up in. So rather than complain about it, I decided to change it. And during the time that I served as state's attorney, we saw a 50% cut in violent crime in Prince George's County. And I also created really important restorative justice programs, anti-truancy programs, and programs to really help uplift our kids and invest in them. As county executive, I've focused on the things I'll focus on in the Senate. Healthcare accessibility, really closing the gap in healthcare and bringing down the cost of healthcare is going to be a real priority for me. I love what President Biden has done to cap the cost of insulin, for example, at $35, to allow Medicare to negotiate directly with the pharmaceutical companies to cap the out-of-pocket cost of prescription drug medications. But I'll continue fighting not only for access to critical health care, but to make sure that more Americans can afford the cost of health care, which, as we know, has bankrupted so many families over the years who just could not afford the health care. I can tell you economic opportunity, as I've talked to Marylanders all across our state, is the number one issue. I've talked to our kids in colleges who say, don't tell us as Democrats about lower inflation or a low unemployment rate if I don't know whether I can afford rent when I graduate. I've heard from other families who say it's really just hard to make it. So I'll be fighting for things like the permanent child tax credit and many other, and also fighting to bring back critical resources across our state, roads and infrastructure to build our economy. And I'll be fighting for democracy like everything. I have to tell you how angry I am. I was 2 when Roe was decided. And it is absolutely unbelievable to me that my daughter, who is 18, has to fight the same fight that should have been won by her grandmother. So I will be co-sponsoring the Women's Health Protection Act And guess what? We know this race could not be any more important. The stakes are so high. It is not just abortion care that's on the ballot. It's women's reproductive rights. It's our freedom. It's our privacy that is on the ballot. And we know they're not done with it. So we look at the effort to defund Planned Parenthood. I'll be fighting like hell against that. We're looking at efforts to move into IVF. I'll be fighting against that. And then the freedoms that all of you are across the world fighting for. Voting rights and decency and dignity and integrity and equality. These are the things as a senator I'll be fighting to make sure that we have in our country. Immigration reform, just making sure we secure these courts. If we don't keep the majority in the Senate, we will be in really dire shape where the Supreme Court is concerned and the other courts. So I'm sorry to be speaking so quickly. I know I don't have a lot of time, but what I can tell you is it is important. This race is so very important. And you should know, in a delegation of 10 people, we don't have any women serving in Maryland, not a single one. We have all 10 of our representatives are men who have served with distinction. But I believe it is important for all of us to see ourselves in the Senate, of every race, every gender, and every background. It makes our policies more complete. It makes our country stronger and better if we are all represented. And I think we absolutely should send a woman to Washington so that the lived experiences of women will be at the table, mothers and others. So this is an important race. I need your help and your vote. It couldn't be any more critical. I am in a tough race. And this is a race that we will win with the people, for the people. It is about the people. And I ask you for your support. So Beth, am I allowed to answer questions? I'm sorry if I've messed up the format here.
You're perfect.
We're doing well. We do have a few questions. And we are moving right along.
Thank you.
Dee will be asking the first question.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Something that I wasn't aware of until I had moved abroad, like many Americans, is that we are one of and the only developed country that actually requires its citizens living outside of the country to file taxes within our home country. So every year we have to file in both our country of residence and in the U.S., which is often complex, costly, and burdensome, and causes difficulties for us to open bank accounts, access retirement funds, make financial investments for our futures. It's the reasons for this were done for good reasons, but trying to avoid financial fraud for most everyday working people, which many of us living abroad still are, it's much more burdensome on us than it is on those who are trying to avoid paying taxes. Can we count on you to work with us on tax reforms that could help provide relief to Americans living abroad?
Oh, absolutely. Tax relief that provides relief to Americans living abroad, absolutely. I think it is, as you've mentioned, that our precedent is very different than the rest of the world. I don't think we should penalize Americans who are working abroad. And so I'd absolutely be working to reform our tax structure there and in other places to make it more fair and equitable, that we are not favoring big corporations and wealthy people, but that we are favoring the efforts of hardworking, everyday people. And so, yes, I absolutely will be there working for the tax to make sure that we are passing smart tax reforms. But again, in order for us to do that, Dee, we have to make sure that we have the majority in the Senate. This Republican caucus will not support the reforms that we need that are sensible and are fair. And in this race in particular, Larry Hogan will be voting with the Republican caucus. He is a decent man, but he's in a party that is led by Trump, and they will be fighting at every turn to make sure that these kinds of sensible policies are not passed and that we're favoring the corporations.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Malika Kasumi from our Reparations Task Force.
Hello, Ms. Alsobrooks. You may not have been on the call earlier, and I'd like to repeat a quote that somebody had said earlier. She said, if you don't have a seat on the table, then you're on the menu. I want to add, and I did say we are definitely on the menu because we don't have a seat at the table, even though we made the table. So this reparation question is not something from left field. It's something for all of us, and it's not directed to you because you're a Black woman there. It was directed to someone else as well. So I'd like to read the question that was made for you by Anton Keith. In consideration of the growing demand from Maryland voters at home and abroad for state-level reparation task force, and the powerful demand of Black Americans across the world for a federal commission to reckon with the damages of chattel slavery, Jim Crow, and modern-day racial disparities, to what extent have you been actively involved with the reparation movement, and would you be willing to support and work towards the passage of HR 40, S40, which only is to create a common sense, a common ground, somebody else said, solution? That's the question.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. I know that Senator Cory Booker has been working diligently on this legislation. It is legislation that I will happily join him in supporting the efforts of the reparations movement. Yes. I've not had an opportunity to answer the rest of your question to work on this. It's been federal legislation, so as a local official, I've not had as many opportunities to join in, but I certainly will as the next senator.
Thank you for that. So the next question is the Congressional Americans Abroad Caucus, led by Congresswoman Dina Titus of Nevada, helps members of Congress remain up to date and demonstrate their support for the issues U.S. citizens abroad face. Would you be willing to support making the Americans Abroad Caucus a bicameral caucus to bring together members of both the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives who share an interest in addressing the unique issues of the overseas community?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, I think that what's important is the engagement, again, makes us all better. You know, I don't think we have any part of our community that is dispensable. And I think it not only benefits our abroad community, but it benefits our country to have the engagement of every one of us, especially including the experiences that many of you are having abroad. I think that your ideas and I think that your perspectives are ones that really make us stronger and better. You'll bring to the table diverse and educated perspectives about the way that things are happening across the world. I think that's a benefit, a net benefit to us. And I absolutely would be supporting the bicameral caucus to make sure that your views and input are heard and that we are, you know, connected and collaborating.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Art Shankler from our Medicare Portability Task Force.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Ms. Alsobrooks. I live in Belgrade, Serbia, where I once had the pleasure of meeting your predecessor, Senator Cardin.
Oh.
So it would be a delight to meet his successor and speak with his successor. My question is about Medicare, sort of on the long lines of some of the other issues that have been raised. Many U.S. citizens abroad have earned their Medicare benefits by working in the U.S. and paying into the system for years. I happen to be one of them. But unfortunately, Medicare benefits are not available outside of the U.S. And many overseas Americans, they either have to pay for private insurance, which can be quite expensive, or they travel back to the U.S. to try to utilize their Medicare benefits. And those costs in the U.S. are often much more costly than that in their host countries, but unfortunately, they can't use their Medicare there. Your campaign literature notes you support passing a Medicare buy-in option. Where do you stand on Medicare portability, i.e. providing Medicare to Americans living overseas who qualify for it, including proposals by Congressman Espaillat of New York in HR 5299 that would seek to remedy this health insurance issue for U.S. citizens abroad and potentially save money for the Medicare system and U.S. taxpayers?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Art. I think it is worth mentioning. You mentioned Senator Cardin, and I wanted to let you all know that I have been endorsed by the sitting senator, who will be senior Senator Van Hollen, has endorsed me. I am also endorsed by all of the members of our federal delegation except one. We announced yesterday the endorsement of Jamie Raskins, who has endorsed me, but I'm endorsed also by Congressman Hoyer and Ivey and Mfume and Sarbanes and others. So I did want to share that with you. And then relating to your question specifically about Medicare, I absolutely would support the portability that you mentioned. It's a matter of basic fairness. You know, if Americans living abroad, to me, it's a matter of basic fairness. And again, as I've mentioned to you, one of the things I've prioritized as county executive and will also prioritize as a senator is healthcare access. I happen to believe that it is a fundamental right of every person to have access to quality and affordable healthcare. I don't know why we would abridge the rights of Americans living abroad and deny them the opportunity to access Medicare benefits. It is something that I see as an injustice and would be certainly working to address it. Again, healthcare is everything. You know, if we don't have, we have to have people who are healthy. And to me, again, it's a matter of basic fairness. And as you've mentioned, I am in favor of moving toward a universal healthcare solution. And the buy-in option is the one that I think is the way, the on-ramp to get us there. But I believe that it is the right of every American to have healthcare.
Thanks very much. By the way, you may know that Congressman Raskin was actually a member of Democrats Abroad when he lived in France a few years ago.
Oh,
And
I did not know that. Oh, wow. Okay.
We're a big fan of his and hopefully a big fan of yours. And Senator Van Hollen, you may know, also grew up overseas, as I recall. So he knows our organization as well. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I've been privileged to work with both of them. And like I said, also been really privileged to have both of their strong support.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, candidate Alsobrooks. Beth Landry here again. Thank you for your time, certainly, and thank you on behalf of the Maryland State team, Democrats Abroad, and everyone who's watching and learning about everyone who's running for both of the races. We have asked all of our questions, and people can of course get in touch with you afterwards if they have other questions. So again, thank you for joining us. I would go ahead and introduce our last candidate for attending.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
And so we have one final candidate. And by the way, this is part 1 of 2. We have a panel tomorrow, and we'll pop the link for that into the chat in just a moment so people can join us in for part 2 of our Maryland primary candidates panel. But first, I will introduce Councilwoman at Large, or Councilmember at Large, Laurie-Anne Sayles, who's running for Congress, Maryland's Congressional District 6. So Laurie-Anne Sayles is a dedicated public servant who has built a successful career in public health and community service. She believes that the government should work for everyone, not just the privileged few. As the youngest child of a veteran and a social worker, Laurie-Anne learned the values of hard work and dedication to public service. She earned her Bachelor of Science in Public Health from the University of Maryland and a Master of Public Administration from the University of Baltimore. In 2017, Laurie-Anne made history as the first Black person elected to the Gaithersburg City Council. She also served as Vice President and chaired the National League of Cities Community and Economic Development Committee. On December 5th, 2022, Laurie-Anne became the first Black woman inaugurated to an at-large Montgomery County Council seat as one of 6 female majority council members. She has fought for bills to provide equal rights, increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and create a cleaner, safer environment for Montgomery County residents. In Congress, Laurie-Anne will continue to fight for families and a government that works for everyone. She inspires change with her resilience and commitment to service. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Beth. And thank you to Democrats Abroad for staying connected and engaged in everything happening here on the home front. My name is Laurie-Anne Sayles, and I am so excited to share with you my Smarter 6th District agenda for Congress. Families have been struggling. We know that times since the pandemic have proved to be even more difficult and challenging for our families. And as a single mom, I know that story all too well. The same stories that our new graduates are feeling, our young families, and our seniors who want to age in place. And so when Congressman Trone decided that he was no longer going to be running for re-election, I knew we needed trusted, tested, and experienced leaders to represent us in Congress, to cut through the chaos happening and build consensus around the issues that are important to many Americans that sit and discuss these issues around their kitchen tables with their families. And so, with so much unpredictability in the wing, the majority continues to get slimmer in the House. And in this particular district, over a decade ago, I helped turn it blue, and I want to keep it blue. I know how difficult that endeavor is, and I know how difficult this race is. It's in Western Maryland. I'm a Black woman. I don't look like the candidates that have been elected there. The candidates that have been elected there don't live in the district. I've lived here, raised my family here, and given back to my community in the most heartfelt, genuine, time-consuming way. And as a public servant, we need to ensure that our residents have safe communities. We take care of our military personnel and veterans. We're also ensuring that we have access to healthcare. I have over 15 years of experience before I became an elected official in public health. And we also have to ensure that we are revitalizing our economy. Western Maryland has a lot of investments that are needed, from increasing broadband connectivity to actual investments to build our economy. You may have woke up to news this morning about the Francis Scott Key Bridge crumbling. Infrastructure is crumbling in Western Maryland, and we need leaders to bring resources back. We also have a lot of rural communities. 6th District is home to the largest ag reserve in the nation. Agriculture is the driving force of our economy, the strongest revenue producer in Maryland. I represent that district, and I want to represent the 6th District. We need to ensure that the places we get our food from are well-equipped and well-resourced and supported across the country. And we are in the midst of an existential crisis. Tackling climate change is too important to turn a blind eye. I was so proud to receive the Sierra Club's endorsement during my county council at-large race, and I look forward to continuing to champion the environmental protections that I led as a member of the Metropolitan Washington Chesapeake Bay and Water Resource Policy Committee, because it's too important not to. From our water infrastructure to our environment to creating renewable energy sources, building energy standards that we can be proud of. And last, but certainly not least, out of 8 candidates, 8 representatives in Congress representing Maryland, we have 0 women. And I'm not saying we need a woman for woman's sake, but we need a good candidate that happens to be a woman. That's me. I hope to earn your support. Look forward to answering your questions. But women have been sending men to speak on their behalf. And now we are fighting like hell to restore Roe v. Wade and codify our bodily autonomy into the Constitution. And so we got a lot of work to do, and electing the right candidate is going to be so important. I hope to earn your vote, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for taking time to speak with Maryland voters all across the globe. Our first question is about some of the struggles that we face as Americans living abroad. We do have to file our U.S. taxes. This is a double filing, and it is quite complex. And would you consider co-sponsoring H.R. 5432, the Americans Abroad Simplified Filing Act, and of course, encouraging your congressional colleagues to do the same? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. You know, as I mentioned, I was a single mom. I benefited from the Earned Income Tax Credit, joined Sherrod Brown on Capitol Hill to advocate for its expansion and full funding. And so ensuring that our taxpayers abroad have the same benefits and protections to be able to offset their tax impact. Can you remind me the bill number again, please?
It is HR 5432.
5432, thank you. I just want to make a note of it. But any opportunity to, simplify the tax code for our residents living abroad who still want to contribute to home base, I'm fully supportive.
Thank you so much. I'll hand over to Beth Landry, the team lead for our Maryland team.
Okay.
So yes, I have the next question, which is a member submission question, and it's regarding climate. So you spoke to this a little bit in your introduction, but Americans will not meet climate goals on their own. They need a fair government-enforced plan of action that includes more than investing in alternative energy sources and technologies. Would you consider reducing your constituents' carbon footprints by setting limits on things like energy use, travel, plastic production, meat production, or clothing imports? What will you propose to directly reduce America's carbon footprint?
Thank you for the question. Maryland passed one of the most ambitious climate solutions now legislation. It was an omnibus bill. It encompassed everything from, solar panels and solar farms, wind farms, planting more trees as we continue to develop. This also is one of the fastest growing districts in the state of Maryland. So as we talk about more infrastructure investments, improving transportation systems, we will be impacting the natural resources across the 6th district. And so, we're going to have to look at new technology to drive the slowing down of the climate impact. We know that transportation is the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. And so that's why we're starting to transition our fleets, our school buses, our public transit stations. We need to be doing the same thing for this district and our transportation systems. We also need more efficient trains that are going through our communities. They need to be faster. They need to be more regular. The saying, if you build it, they will come. If you build a reliable, an affordable, and an efficient transportation system, the people of Western Maryland want to make it to DC faster. They don't want to have to struggle through what's happening in 270. We know that there is a lot of flights going around the country, and I know that there's technology to invest in solar-powered, planes. I think we have to get a better handle on the planes that are currently flying. We just heard about another plane losing a piece of its equipment while in flight. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We're currently creating the regulatory environment for our climate action plan in Montgomery County. And that is to, be net zero by 2030. How are we going to get there if we don't have a bipartisan buy-in to ensure that these policies that are impacting rural conservative communities are also ensuring that they're part of the discussion and part of the investments to transition to cleaner energy sources. So it's not going to be easy, but building coalitions is something that I have honed and have become really good at, and hope to be able to do that at the federal level and across the country. We have to hold our foreign allies accountable and ensure that we're engaging in clean energy protections and treaties to ensure that we have partners in this effort to ensure a cleaner, greener, more efficient future.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one final question from one of our Maryland constituents. I'll hand it over to Dee.
Hello. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having
Americans abroad faced a number of unique challenges, including barriers to voting, complex and costly tax filing, the inability to access financial institutions and consular services, as well as not being recognized and understood as a sizable constituency by our congressional representatives. Would you consider co-sponsoring H.R. 2729, the Commission on Americans Living Abroad Act, which would enable studying how federal laws and policies affect U.S. citizens living in foreign countries?
Certainly. As Beth mentioned, I'm the daughter of a veteran. My father was stationed abroad quite a bit, and my mother got some relief during the summer. I was able to stay in Belgium. And so ensuring that he can benefit from the same protections that we have here in the United States was important. And as I'm learning more and more about the Democrats abroad, you're paying into this system these protections, and they should be afforded to you wherever you go. We have insurance plans that provide the same benefits and protections when you travel internationally. Your phone service follows you wherever you go, and your passport protects you and should ensure that you have the same benefits that are afforded to other taxpayers that live here right at home.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time to talk with for that
That
is it.
Fast, Beth. Okay, I really enjoyed my time. Thank you so much for having me.
And for folks who are listening in, they can get in touch with you and your campaign if they have other questions.
Yes.
But our last message to everyone, and this is about all candidates, is about the importance, sending off again about voting, making sure that people know how to, and that they do that this coming, or so for the Maryland primary, if you're a Maryland voter, and for November, which was the last thing that I wanted to speak to. So to thank everyone who has joined for today's day one panel. I put the link in the chat a little bit ago for tomorrow for day two, so people can hop on to see that for our continuation for 5 more candidates who are joining us tomorrow. Thank you, especially for our candidates who are making the time in their busy schedules this week to speak to us as voters abroad. And I hope you've learned a lot from this discussion, as I certainly have. And we want to thank you again. Please remember that Maryland's 2024 primary ballots should start going out on March 30th, and you can request yours today at votefromabroad.org, votefromabroad.org. You can also visit votefromabroad.org/states/Maryland. We'll put that link in the chat for more information on voting dates and deadlines. Don't delay, and also make sure to follow up with your local election office if you don't receive your requested ballot. And in closing, I'd like to give a very huge shout out to all of our great volunteers, both on camera and behind the scenes, and to let everyone know, everyone on the call know that all our Democrats Abroad teams would love to have your help. Please consider stepping up as a volunteer to help us get at the vote. We want to make the table longer, not a higher fence. So please get in touch with us as the Maryland State team or another state team that might represent you. You can email us at md@democratsabroad.org, and you can also sign up to volunteer with the team at a link we'll put in the chat. Your support also goes a long way. Please visit www.democratsabroad.org/Maryland MD24 candidates donate so that we can continue to bring more events like these to Americans living around the world. Even a small donation helps, including becoming a sustaining monthly donor. Lastly, please help by spreading the word and reaching more voters. Again, that link on the ways you can take action should be being put into the chat, but Please take action. Please request your ballots. Don't delay. Do it today. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes. And for then, we will say goodbye and close the call. We hope to see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. U.S. Eastern for day 2 of our Maryland candidate panel for the 2024 primary. Thank you again for joining us. And don't forget that your vote this election year is incredibly important. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.